Can diplomacy end the conflict in Libya? The country has been divided since 2014 with rival governments in the east and west. The US and now Turkiye are working on a plan to unify the warring parties. But given previous failed attempts, will their efforts stabilise Libya? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. For a decade and a half, Libya has been struggling with both conflict and deep political divisions. A number of international diplomatic initiatives have failed to end the impasse. It has two rival administrations, two prime ministers and two seats of government. Now a US plan to unify the warring parties under a power-sharing deal seems to be gathering momentum. Alongside Washington, Turkiye has also been involved in bringing the parties together. But is there common ground to reach a deal, or could all of this be a recipe for renewed fighting? We'll talk to our guests in a moment, but first this report from Michael Apple.
Anger on the streets of Tripoli, where a civil disobedience campaign is in full swing. Chronic power cuts, high inflation, fuel and cash shortages, and a protracted political deadlock have prompted many Libyans to vent their frustration.
This year the situation has gotten even worse, with power cuts lasting up to 10 hours. The lives and businesses of the people have been badly impacted. So many have closed their businesses and left.
The country has known little peace in recent decades. Muammar Gaddafi came to power in a military coup in 1969. He ruled for 42 years, maintaining his leadership with authoritarian control, a strong security apparatus, and a system of tribal alliances. In 2011, a wave of pro-democracy protests spread across the Middle East and North Africa. Known as the Arab Spring, it ended Gaddafi's reign. He was captured and killed. In the scramble for power and influence, the then destabilized Libya endured two civil wars. In 2020, a nationwide ceasefire froze the battle lines. It left the internationally recognized Government of National Unity in control of Tripoli. A rival administration, the House of Representatives, is based in Benghazi. It's aligned with the warlord Khalifa Haftar and his self-declared Libyan National Army. Much of the south is controlled by a patchwork of local armed groups. Several multinational attempts to break the standoff, unify the state, and heal decades-old divides have failed. The UN has documented systemic corruption, cronyism, human rights abuses, and impunity in both administrations. Turkiye has stepped up its efforts to bridge the divide, as has the US. President Donald Trump's senior advisor on Arab and African affairs has been shuttling between the parties. Reports indicate there's fresh momentum behind a US-led effort to secure a power-sharing arrangement. Libya has Africa's largest oil reserves, and Washington is promising major investment should a deal be reached. Libyans will be hoping that any resolution will break the cycle of prolonged instability and suffering. Michael Apple, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
So let's discuss all of this further with our guests who are joining us for today's Inside Story. And in York, in the UK, we have Anas Al-Gomati, the founder and director of the Sadeq Institute, the first public policy think tank in Libya. William Lawrence is director of the North African Area Studies Programme at the National Council on US-Arab Relations. He joins us from Washington, D.C. And in Muğla, in Turkiye, Murat Aslan, a security and defence researcher at the SETA Foundation, an independent think tank focused on Turkiye. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. Anas, you've been on this programme before with me during the long history since 2014. 2011. And I spent many months in Libya in 2011 as armed groups took control of the country and NATO bombarded. I was there when Gaddafi was killed. In fact, I was there when they put his body on display, and I saw his body. That was supposed to be the moment of a new beginning. And of course, we are 15 years on from there. I mean, briefly, because it's a huge subject, what's gone wrong in your country?
It's hard to tell in a sentence. I remember when we commemorated the 10-year anniversary of Libya's revolution, the opening sentence to our edited volume, The Great Game, which is what Libya has really become, this theatre of great power competition. For those looking back at the revolution, we don't know if it's an obituary or a love letter, because the ambitions of Libyans was to transfer power to a civilian government, a democratic government, a responsible government. And since then, we've had 7 interim governments, and we've had so many civil wars that it's now difficult to count how many there have been, but at least 3 since 2011. Now, I think the difficulty to try and get Libyans to agree on something is also trying to get foreign powers to agree on something. And I think today we can say that there's a lot more ripeness around the key foreign players that have been active in Libya over the last 15 years. But amongst the rival groups that are on the ground, they've had so much war and no reconciliation. So I think there's a real lack of trust, a deficit of trust. There's been no reconciliation process, and nobody has been held accountable, not only for the last 15 years, but for the 42 years that preceded. So I think it's a good question to ask, but it leaves many more questions that Libyans are still asking for, and I don't think they've given quite up yet.
Well, Murat, for 12 years, the country's had 2 separate governments. In Tripoli, the Government of National Unity, recognised by the UN, one of its main backers, Turkiye, where you are. In Benghazi, the Government of National Stability. Although this active conflict now been frozen for 6 years, we've had neither stability or unity. What would be your view on how these 2 governments are actually performing for their people?
I think we have to first understand the psychology and sociology of Libyan people, because we know that they inherited the legacy of Gaddafi era. On the other hand, the identity formation is a bit different from the other ones if compared. For instance, the cities are the base of the identity descriptions of the citizens, but if you go to the further east or south, it's the tribes. On the other hand, the mayors are much more active if compared to the Western cities, but the police officers are attached to mayors, though, where the armed groups are much more influential. So under these circumstances, once you are talking about the social cohesion, there must be a sort of base that they can promote their common shared identity. And it's interesting, when I was visiting Libya many times, it was very interesting that they are the people smiling and be angry at the other in the meantime. It's a very tough job, but they are succeeding it. So if something pops up as a problem in the public, the interest groups, identities, armed groups, political currencies, they clash with each other easily. But at the end of the game, they sit, talk, and easily build a sort of common understanding. Well, Libya is different. I mean, we have to accept it first.
OK, William, so we have the 2 rival governments, one of them led by a general, he calls himself Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar, and the other, the internationally recognised, UN-recognised government in Tripoli. Which one would you say is providing a better service, is a better government for its people, or is it hard to say?
In terms of the politics of it, I think the major difference, and it gets back to what the last speaker just said, is that the West is still trying to be democratic, and they have a certain amount of local democracy elections that have been going on throughout this 15-year period, and aspirations of what democracy yields, accountability, reducing corruption, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to the overall governance performance of the 2 sides, sadly, we've seen a lot of accountability issues and corruption issues, as was noted in the March UN panel of experts report. And in terms of the international community, I agree with everything Anas and the other speakers said, but I think there's been both an emphasis on and slightly greater success in the economic and security spheres and not as much in the political sphere. And I found it interesting right after they rolled out a roadmap for new elections in June. In July, we're talking about a new power sharing deal in which elections are barely mentioned. So the international community, for a lot of reasons, the Ukraine war and Iran war and energy needs and a whole bunch of other things, wants Libya to reunify and stabilize and help the world and help Europe more. But they still haven't solved the fundamental problem that led to the 2011 events, which is, can Libyans govern themselves in a democratic and transparent way? And with that goal seems to be still pretty far off.
Well, Anas, you're the Libyan on the panel. Questions there from the other two panelists about the background of Libya and the way Libya works. Do you think elections are a good goal in the near term?
I think it's a goal for the Libyan people, and I think it's not been a goal for the internationals. And I think William was right. I think in terms of what has been on the table most recently, it has seen more momentum than I think in any kind of previous attempt, but no one can actually tell you what the deal is. And I think the reason of that is the US, Masad Boulos, the US envoy, has started with the ending and not the middle. And I think the ending actually is just these positions, that perhaps Khalifa Haftar's son, Saddam Haftar, will become president. The current prime minister in Tripoli, Abdulhamid Dbeibah, will continue as a prime minister. They haven't told us the mechanisms, who's going to sign it, what's actually going to happen the day afterwards, how they actually share power. And I think one of the dangers, obviously, is that they're neglecting this idea of elections and just saying, we'll kick that down the road. They've kicked that down the road for 15 years. Well, they've kicked that down the road for the last 12 years, in fact. But for the most part, Libyans overwhelmingly have signed up to vote. There's 2.8 million people that are eligible to vote, and they've all registered. In local elections, they come out to vote. They're blocked from voting in the east and in the south. So as a litmus test, Libyans themselves want to be able to determine who gets to rule their country, how they get to be responsible or responsive for these local services that are an absolute disaster today. The electricity, water, health sector, in particular, to name three, are really, really bad. Libyans want to be able to determine who gets to be able to do those things. And a unified government is not a plan for a responsive or responsible government. The two parties that have been at war or been at conflict or been competing over the last decade or the last 5 years, since the last 6 years, since the last unity government, they don't hold the entire tools of the state. You need a functioning judiciary to be able to hold people to account. You need local services to actually be delivered by technocrats, not by men in military uniforms or family members of Abdulhamid Dbeibah. So I think in that sense, all of the factors that we've spoken about in abstract, they're very real for Libyans themselves. And if they could get Libyans to vote, or Libyans could vote themselves, they would. The plan doesn't include voting, and I think there's a key reason for that. The American envoy himself came to Misrata, which is a very powerful city in western Libya, fought against Khalifa Haftar in that last war. He left with a photograph. You can't sign photographs. And I think that's the real element here, is there is no plan for how we get this unified government in. There is no plan for elections. There's a lot of wishful thinking, a lot of photographs. You can't sign photographs, and you can't make that reality into a stable plan that stops a war or averts a third war in the last 12 years.
William, you heard Anas there talk about how bad things are on the ground in Libya. Frequent power cuts, blackouts. Many people don't have access to safe drinking water. Estimated third of the population close to or in poverty. And yet, Libya sits on the largest oil reserves on the African continent. It should be, and it has a relatively small population. It should be very rich, should it not?
Absolutely. And that's been one of the major conundrums of the last many decades, that Libya is so wealthy. They wanted to be a Dubai. They wanted to, be one like the Gulf countries and build up the coastline and have all kinds of international investment. They have a highly, highly educated population, very entrepreneurial population. That is champing at the bit to sort of be released, once these political things can be sorted out and the economy can get going. There's a lot that can be accomplished in Libya, but instead you have a lot of the wealth tied up in a sovereign wealth fund nobody's touching because they're protecting it for the future. You have Libya producing oil about half of what it's could, and then what's there, is it barely runs the government, and then there's the corruption issue that we've been talking about, and then of course a lot of oil gets sold in gas gets sold in neighboring countries and smuggled out because it's all subsidized. So it's a very dysfunctional country in a very wealthy, with very wealthy resources and wealthy human resources that aren't being fully tapped, and that led to the frustration of the Arab Spring and the current frustration. And some Libyans are probably okay with a power sharing deal if it sort of gets the economy working and gets lives to be better in the short term, but they know that won't yield the long-term results that they're all looking for, because as Enes said, an unaccountable government won't deliver over the long term in a sustainable way.
Murat, Turkiye now seems to have joined the US in pushing this plan for unification, which is interesting because Turkiye has been the main supporter of one side of Libya, the government in Tripoli. What do you know there in Turkiye about what is being proposed and why Turkiye has decided to back this US plan?
Well, from the very beginning, Turkish foreign policy regarding Libya was very clear. United, integrated, integral, one Libya rather than divided. And there are reasons. One reason is that the deep historical linkages of Libyan people to Turks. We know the history. The second one, it's about the Eastern Mediterranean Sea's geopolitics, because the eastern shores are important for Turkish foreign policy, especially for the exclusive economic zone or continental shelf delimitation with Libyan government. But whatever, Turkish foreign policy makers regard all Libyans as a unique society and wants to deal with all of them. I know that it was 2019 and 20, Khalifa Haftar challenged the Tripoli government by the support of United Arab Emirates and also by the presence of Russian military. So that was exactly what Turkey was against. And today, Turkey established a great bridge with Benghazi. Currently, Turkish businessmen are in Benghazi doing business, and think that unifying institutions as a first step is the priority of the Turkish government. And the second step should be, for sure, a political transition to fair elections, constitutional writing, and also a stable government for the whole Libya. And please, let's keep something in mind. It's what we have a state in Libya, but there's no system. So what Turkey wants is currently to build a system that will cover the overall Libyan, the north, south, or east, or west, doesn't matter. And system building should be on the agenda, because they don't need a state building, but system.
Anas, you mentioned earlier on very limited details of this new plan and exactly how it will work, but some of the names are familiar. Dbeibeh would remain the Prime Minister, we think, from most of the leaks, and Saddam Haftar, the son of General Haftar, would become the head of a new presidential reformed version of the Presidential Council. These names are familiar. Can I show you this? The UN Panel of Experts report. That's the report that goes to the Security Council. This one was from March. Let me read it to you. The panel found that armed group actors, mainly Ibrahim al-Dbeibeh, that is the nephew and national security advisor of the Prime Minister, and Saddam Haftar, developed and honed their capabilities to exert control of the National Oil Corporation at every level of the decision-making process. And it then talked about the scale and level of the organisation of illicit petroleum exports, both crude oil and refined products. Pretty damning indictment of the two family names there.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, often people ask me, can Dbeibeh and Haftar work together? And I say, well, they already do. And they have a very fruitful arrangement in the oil industry. They make hundreds of millions, if not by this time, because that's an older report that they're making in the billions. So they have a business arrangement. The problem is they don't have a political arrangement to share power because they don't trust each other. This is not an ideological division. This is not a conflict. Conflicts are about irreconcilable ideas. This is this competition. This is like a bank heist and the two bank robbers arguing about who gets the higher cut. And secondly, do you trust the other one to let you live with that money? So I think the real question is, can you share power, cooperate in power? Because then that's what the American plan has been. The American plan didn't start with bringing together their two rival parliaments, which would actually have the legal mandate to install this government. They brought together the two elites that control those parliaments, and they figured out a unified budget. So the American demand actually is quite simple. We want you to be able to spend money so we can make money on the other end of this. This is Mas'ad Boulos, by the way, who is a second-hand car dealer who made his trade and fortune in Nigeria. This is not a seasoned diplomat, and the Americans are not seasoned diplomats in the first place. We can see what they've been doing since the events of what happened in Israel and Gaza over the last several years. These are not custodians of diplomacy and seasoned veterans. They don't care if the deal goes wrong or how Libyans will deal with it or how this impacts the region. They just care that they make some money at the end of it, and that the region itself, Turkiye, Egypt, whoever else may have to pick up the pieces afterwards. But the two individuals that you just mentioned, they don't have a problem with having a business arrangement. They have a problem with sharing power because they don't trust each other. And I think that's really where all of this problem kind of arises from, because if there isn't a plan to run Libya and there is just a plan to hold Libya, and that's what we've seen for the last decade, the two rival parties holding Libya in east and west, but not actually governing it together, then you'll see more of these kind of photo ops. You'll see them doing joint military exercises in the city of Sirte that divides the east and the west. The US did its flintlock exercise a few months ago. They were photographed there, but they're not jointly operating and conceding power and blending their command structures together. So you've got two different, it's like having a picnic with two different picnic baskets. It makes no sense. You're not sharing a meal. You just come to eat your separate meals in the same area. And they're eating Libyan food. They're eating Libyan oil, Libyan resources every single day. The Libyan state is getting poorer. The Libyan people are getting poorer. And when these massive flaring up moments, like what we've seen over the last week of really desperate situations, electricity supply, health, transportation, on every kind of level, Libyans get frustrated. They have to ask themselves, these two divided elites, why should we give them another 12 years or 5 years, 6 years respectively, to steal more and not be responsive to our needs? So that's the major issue here. It's not only a perception gap, because you also have rival armed groups that are outside of this, and they don't know what the terms of the deal are. If they don't know what the terms of the deal are, they will start writing their own terms. And the simplest litmus test is, go on tomorrow and coronate Saddam Haftar or Ibrahim Dbeibeh or Abdulhamid Dbeibeh and tell them the Americans are going to install this. What is the plan if people start fighting back? What is the plan for the bloodshed that could occur for a third time? Who is going to take responsibility, or who's going to feel the blowback? Not the Americans. It's the Europeans. It will be the regional players. It will be the Turks. It will not be the Americans. They won't be here to save the day tomorrow. They will just care that if any money gets spent, that those monies are dollar, that money is in dollar, and that it's making its way to the US or privately in the hands of Boulos family or Trump family, because that's ultimately what they care about. That's the bottom line.
William, Anas there raises the prospect of renewed conflict in Libya. And he's right, is he not, that there are, yes, two governments, but it's traditionally a tribal society. There are numerous competing interests, and some estimates as many as 400,000 armed men in the country with conflicting loyalties. How worried are you?
Very worried. This piece is held for 6 years for a whole bunch of fortuitous reasons with flare-ups from time to time. I would push back gently on the idea of tribal society. I mean, the 2011 Arab Spring revolt was in many respects anti-tribal, and Gaddafi tried to deploy loyal tribes against the militias that weren't generally organizing on a tribal basis and failed. And one of the slogans of 2011 was "La ala qabaliya," no to tribalism. So the tribal aspect's important. It's important to the solution, but it's not dominant. Instead, the way I would characterize Libya is many militias organized on things other than tribal basis that are defending a revolution that hasn't succeeded yet. And whether they're focused on the political side or the economic side or the security side or a combination of that, they want to achieve what Libya needs. I mean, there isn't a lot of daylight between what these militias want and what Libya needs. It's just they haven't been able to get it yet for all of the reasons that Anas and the other guests are talking about in terms of the international factors and the domestic factors that have pushed against success. So I'm very worried this could break out again. Although Libyans don't fight for very long or very ferociously. At one point I used to say Libya is 50 conflicts in all around the country, and they flare up from time to time, and sometimes they unite with the East-West conflict that drives these higher political arrangements that we've been discussing. But ultimately, in the end, we're going to need a change of the guard. We're going to need new faces coming in, the technocrats Anas is talking about, a new generation of leaders. Libya has very competent people that have been excluded from power on both sides, and a turning of the page. Let me add one other aspect here. In Skhirat, the 2015 negotiations, the big mistake is they brought in the politicals and not the militaries. And now what they're doing is they're talking to this sort of power brokers on each side and not bringing in the political side. And any kind of political power sharing deal that excludes important voices won't be sustainable.
If I can bring in Murat at the end, because lots of concern there that this is a risk. It's certainly a deviation from what had been the official UN plan. Do you think that that view that maybe this is pretty high risk is shared in Ankara? Briefly, please.
Well, Ankara is interested in the ultimate vision. It's having Libya under one government and sustainable and also eternal. Because once you divide any country in the region, expect a domino effect. And Libya, well, it was 2014 and 2019, it was a test. So Turkey does not want to see any divided country in the region, because we don't want. That's very clear. On the other hand, the new government in Libya, after the Dbeibeh or Haftar, doesn't matter, it must be able. And that's the problem. But what I observe from the statements of the Libyans when I have interviews with them, I have just concluded my latest book on Libya, by the way. It's about to be published. Well, they want to have a hero governing the overall country, like an Atatürk of Turkey. Why? Because each armed group in country is somehow strong enough to keep a city under control, but they want a united Libya, and that's exactly what Turkey wants. So that's why the efforts of Turkey and the United States have intensified to keep the country under one administration and with a strong democratic culture. And it will take time, that's for sure, but achievable.
Thank you very much to our guests today, Murat Aslan, Anas Al-Gomati and William Lawrence. If you missed any of our discussion today, you can find it and all of our other programmes on our website, aljazeera.com. As ever, we'd like to get your views on all of this. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or on X, you can find us at AJ Inside Story. That's it from me, James Bays, and the team here until next time. But stay tuned. Al Jazeera's coverage from around the world continues in a moment.